This episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany is brought to you with support by New York State United Teachers, which represents more than 600,000 educators and school-related professionals in New York. Dispatches is also supported by the public affairs firm O'Donnell and Associates. For more information, check out o'donnellsolutions.com.
Off the record?
No, don't tell me. 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 You should tell me
Why?
anonymously.
I've also declared war on potholes, so here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of D.C., and Eddie Vedder comes out. And he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is Dispatches from Planet Albany, a podcast about power and politics in New York. And on today's episode, we're checking in on the process of awarding casino licenses in the New York City area. The high-stakes drama has been filled with twists and turns, but none more surprising or impactful than MGM abruptly dropping out of the running in mid-October for one of three potential licenses, despite their racino in Yonkers being considered for years as one of the likely candidates to get a chance to offer live table games. With the field of eligible players whittled down to three, we're considering how we got here and what comes next with Nick Garber, a political reporter for Crain's New York Business. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's start with the most recent and shocking news, which came on October 14th when MGM Resorts dropped its casino bid, citing changes to the competitive and economic assumptions underpinning their application. Quote, "The newly defined competitive landscape, with four proposals clustered in a small geographic area, challenges the returns we initially anticipated from this project." They go on to take issue with the potential length of the license, saying that they had been basing their assumptions on a 30-year license. Was this a big WTF moment for you? And if so, how are you processing their rationale for abandoning this long-anticipated dream?
Yeah, it was pretty shocking. It was a bit of a WTF moment, at least at first. I would say it started to make a bit more sense to me as the days and weeks have gone by, although I know there's still some suspicion that they had, that there was some kind of weird motive at play. But I mean, I think their statement did explain it a bit that, when they began this process, they weren't anticipating that there would only be three or four contenders all clustered in, aside from MGM, all clustered in a pretty, small area of the city, which, I mean, yeah, I guess you could dispute how much that matters for a bid in Yonkers, but it does seem like there's real fear now that these surviving bids will, as they say, cannibalize each other, depress each other's revenues because they're so close together. So that's one factor. MGM's bid was small to begin with, noticeably smaller than some of the others. So there was a sense that maybe they wouldn't even win one of the licenses at all, that it would just go to Bally's based on sheer kind of economic development potential. And there was this very under the radar change that the Gaming Commission made in the last few weeks, which didn't get almost any attention at the time, but they announced a new rule saying that the length of each casino license will vary based on how much money each bid is going to invest, which I think previously they had never spelled that out. There had just been kind of this general assumption that maybe they would give away 30-year licenses or something like that. But instead, the Gaming Commission said we're going to vary the length of the licenses based on the size of each bid, which would have meant for MGM only getting, I think it was a 15-year license.
Well, but I've read that this is part of the underlying law, that the length of the license was going to be tied to the investment. So to act like the regulations were going to be a surprise, that the Gaming Commission's actual implementation of that was a surprise, seems like a far stretch to me, given how much money is at stake here. I mean, is this the case where lobbyists just didn't do their due diligence in terms of reading the law, or they just thought that they could call the bluff of the Gaming Commission? Have you heard anything about this?
Maybe we need a refresher, or
Sure.
I need to refresh my memory, but I thought, it was still TBD what scheme the Gaming Commission was going
Sure.
to land on in terms of those license years, but maybe it wasn't necessarily clear that they were going to be this strict
Okay.
in terms of cutting them off at 15 years. Even there, though, there is some suspicion where, would they really have expected that they would get denied a renewal after 15
Right.
years? that's also kind of odd. So no, I mean there are definitely still some unanswered questions. Maybe here it's worth just mentioning on like a final factor, which is the general feeling like maybe these casinos just won't be quite as lucrative as they were anticipated to be 4 or so years ago when this process got set in motion. This is something that Las Vegas Sands pointed to when they dropped out of their when they dropped their Long Island bid a few months ago, which is the rise of iGaming, mobile sports betting, stuff like that, which makes it less necessary to trek all the way to a casino to place bets. Sands said that was, I think maybe the major factor in them dropping out. And so I don't think that MGM pointed to that explicitly, but you could imagine that that was one of these economic factors too.
Well, do you buy these arguments, or are you wearing a tinfoil hat like some people are who are arguing that this is all a bone being thrown to President Donald Trump, who has a stake really in the Bally's project? Because if they get a license, what we've heard reported is that the Trump organization stands to make $115 million. And if you're MGM and you don't really expect that much from the Yonkers site, maybe you view this as a way to curry favor for other things that might mean more to you in the future.
Yeah, it's a compelling theory. I'll just say I've asked around about it and I've not gotten any evidence that, that there's funny business going on, but I understand the suspicions for sure. And if any of your listeners have have evidence to the contrary, they can shoot me an email and I would love to hear from them.
So MGM is left with what? A harness track and VLTs and Yonkers that are now going to have to compete with likely two, maybe three new casinos offering live table games in close proximity?
Yeah, and the member of the community advisory committee said when they were voting to advance MGM's bid a few weeks ago, we need to do this because if we don't do it, MGM Empire City will die and be, replaced by these three city-based
Hmm.
bids. So yeah, I mean, it does seem like even MGM supporters feel like they're going to be in deep trouble if they have to compete against these other casinos.
Well, now that Bally's is so close to the finish line, they seem like a favorite, but that hasn't always been the case, is my understanding. That this is a project that had to kind of get pulled along multiple times, had to get help from influential politicos like Mayor Eric Adams. So, is there a possibility that the people at MGM just thought this project nearby in the Bronx was never going to get this far, and now that it is, they're looking at a landscape and saying, okay, well, someone in the Bronx, someone in Manhattan, they're not going to drive or take the train north to Yonkers if they have this option in the Bronx.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much those hindrances for Bally's would have made a difference for MGM because at the time that that was going on, it still seemed as though some of the other downstate
Mm.
bids could have advanced, if I'm not messing up my timeline here. There were obviously all the Manhattan ones, there was the one in Coney Island in Brooklyn. So
But they
it
could have made a
seemed for a while.
calculation that they thought those were never going to be approved
Right,
given the
right.
community boards and the local opposition, which seemed 3 hours north in Albany as ultimately making those projects never realistic.
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
Well, where do you think this goes from here? Is this the last we hear of the MGM casino bid? Because the Yonkers mayor has said we need to have an investigation, and while the governor has said I don't see the need for an investigation, there is the state inspector general's office, which has the authority to investigate not necessarily the actions of the operators, but the conduct of the gaming regulator, in this case the gaming commission, to potentially say, well, why did you come out with this time period when you did come out with it? Any indication at this point that that might be something that gets looked into by State Inspector General Lucy Lang?
I have not been following up on that closely, so off the top of my head, I don't know if the folks in Yonkers have taken any steps to actually get the state to look into it. I guess one thing you could say is there is still a possibility out there that not all three licenses
Right.
will be awarded this year, which is something the Gaming Commission has been adamant about, that they're not required to give out all three. That's a maximum. So that's actually something that SL Green CEO Mark Holliday has said, I think on an investor call a couple of weeks ago. He said, we don't view this as over. There's always next year or whenever it is that they could conceivably reopen the process if not all licenses were awarded this year. So it could be that this is total speculation, but that the MGM people might want to give it another go in a future year if not all licenses were given out.
Well,
This is
let's
all conjecture.
speculate a little more then. Is there reason to believe, are there tea leaves that you're reading that suggest that not all three of the remaining projects will get a casino license? Because I could imagine in a world where the regulators say convenience gaming is a real thing, and I'm concerned about the cannibalism of two Queens projects, so maybe we just do one in Queens and one in the Bronx, or maybe we don't think the Bronx project is maximizing our potential revenue, so let's go back to the drawing board. I mean, is there any reason to think that might actually happen, or should we look at this the other way and say the MTA is like waiting on checks? They want this money tomorrow, so we're going to hand out three licenses, whether they're the best possible ones or not.
I've posed that question to people who are closely following the process, and the answer I've gotten so far is no, that the state would be pretty insane to pass up the opportunity to just get these three licenses out of the way now and, gamble, no pun intended, on giving away a third, at some point in the future. It took so much blood, sweat, and tears just to get these three projects to the finish line this year that it would be, quite a risk, especially given all the transit money, tax money that's
Hmm.
riding on this, to do this whole process over again next year or whenever it would be, and hope that a license gets awarded. Off the top of my head, I don't know what, all these scenarios have been modeled extensively in these studies that the state commissioned. I don't know what the studies say about how like two really successful casinos would compare to three slightly less successful casinos clustered near each other. Just intuitively, it seems hard for me to imagine that the two could possibly be preferable to three.
No, but
Like
like
even
you said, it gives you the opportunity to say, well, this kind of works here. Maybe we can reevaluate something on Long Island. Maybe we can reevaluate something in the Westchester County area.
Yeah, who knows? I mean,
Hmm.
so we'll have about a month to see what this pretty obscure five-person board, the gaming facility location board, decides to do. They're holding these kind of private meetings that they've already started meeting in the last couple of weeks, and I think they've scheduled one a week all the way through the end of November. So it could be that when they go into executive session in these meetings, that's exactly what they're talking about. We don't know.
Well, what is the timeline moving forward? Is our expectation that before the end of the year we'll hear from the Gaming Facilities Location Board?
Yes, they have said that by December 1st of this year, they will make their determinations about who gets licenses. So that is rapidly approaching. And then by December 31st of this year, the Gaming Commission will award those licenses. So that basically means that in November, they should be making up their minds about who's getting them.
And rewinding in the process to the community board votes, one of the Manhattan casinos, when it was shot down, the company's CEO, who was present, went on a bit of a tirade, calling out what he saw was a display of cowardice. Were you in the room for that? And if so, what was it like?
I was. It might have been my video that you saw. That was
Okay,
Mark Holliday, the CEO of SL Green. It was profoundly awkward and very tense because he was standing like, a foot from these committee members who were
right.
just like shuffling out of the room, trying not to make eye contact with him. And I saw immediately as Mark Holliday walked out of the room, some of his lieutenants at the bid sort of got up and followed him and were, I'm sure, like, dreading, the conversations that they were going to have once they got back to the office. It was weird, but I mean, it was remarkable because here were like volunteer members of this committee just totally defeating this powerful real estate executive who, by the way, was slated to get I think, $10 million bonus had their bid got a license. So, perhaps that factored into why he was just so angry. It's an interesting counterpoint to the idea that like real estate runs everything in New York, not always.
So up here in the Albany area, I was scratching my head about the opposition from Broadway proponents to a Manhattan casino project because to me it doesn't seem like it's one of those things that's going to cannibalize the interest in Broadway, and really all it's going to do is bring in a potential new clientele. What do you make of the opposition that the Broadway community had? Did it seem to make sense to you from a business perspective, or was it more of a cultural thing?
I think it was more of a cultural thing. I confess to having the same kind of confusion as you did. I think it came down to, those kind of classic complaints about neighborhood character. They see Times Square as obviously this kind of chaotic touristy mess,
It
but
looks like it's
also
a casino destination already. People are all wandering around. They got their cameras. They're dressed up. I mean, it seems like there should be a casino in Times Square already.
it made some sense, I have to say. Yeah, I never heard a super coherent, it will threaten our business model because of XYZ. I think it came more down to these kind of fuzzier, neighborhood character complaints, as well as, I mean, maybe this has more basis to it, real fears about congestion, just
Sure.
basic like foot traffic, sidewalks, like this place is already miserable, it'll be so much more miserable. Those were more prevalent from what I could tell.
So New York City is not a community with a lack of interesting political characters, but gambling personalities, I think, are a unique force unto themselves. And I wonder if you had any interesting interactions with gambling interests or gambling operators at any point in this process today.
I feel like they mostly deployed their traditional, PR and lobbying teams when it
The
came to
buttoned up crew.
interacting, yeah, with reporters. But I think the people who really were the recipients of the like interesting kinds of outreach were the local residents, the people who actually had the power to sway these community advisory committees. One that I reported on was had to do with the Times Square bid, this single apartment complex called Manhattan Plaza, which for any readers who aren't familiar, it's an apartment complex in Hell's Kitchen, a few blocks from Times Square, affordable housing, predominantly artists. It's where Timothy Chalamet grew up, a lot of other, artsy kids in New York. The SL Green, Times Square, Caesar's Palace, Rock Nation bid went all out on trying to win over Manhattan Plaza. The biggest thing they did was they offered them a basically or no strings or few strings attached, just sort of cash offer. Basically, we will give, I believe it was $22.5 million to this apartment complex to be spent. We'll appoint a board of a few tenant presidents and they will kind of decide how to spend this money. And then we'll also give you a percentage of our profits in over the course of decades.
You have noted that both the Steve Cohen project as well as the one in the Bronx proposed tax rates that were at or near the bare minimum of what might be allowed, suggesting they're like, hey, this is all you got, baby. We're the top dog. You're gonna have to go with us, so I don't need to sweeten the pot. Is there a chance in your mind that that ends up biting them in the butt, so to speak? Is that something where the state says, I'm not interested in this proposal. We think we can get more the next time around.
I guess it all depends on how serious the gaming facility location board is about this idea that they don't need to give away all
Mm.
three. Again, I mean, like to put it all in perspective, like a 30% tax on some of these table games, it may be close to the bare minimum, but that's still hundreds of millions of dollars a year that doesn't exist right now for two out of the three that are brand new proposals. So, I mean, it's not nothing. And again, like the state has already put this into its budget to some degree. The MTA is counting on these revenues. So yeah, if you're a member of the gaming facility location board, you're probably a little underwhelmed. But does that mean you're gonna threaten to pull the plug? Unclear.
What about the license fee? I think we've heard the number 500 million bandied around a lot. Is that something that is set in stone, or is that one of the variables at this point, whether they actually are required to pay $500 million dollars or maybe even more than $500 million dollars moving forward?
Yes, it's a minimum. That is one thing where I had kind of taken it for granted that each winner will just pay the 500 million and that'll be that. But Resorts World revealed in one of these filings that they submitted a couple weeks ago that they're going to offer 600 million. They're upping the ante and offering proactively to, sweeten their deal even more to pay more than that 500 million. So I don't think there's any way that any of these three surviving applicants could pay less than that, but clearly there is an ability to, if you want to tell the state you'll give them $100 million more in free money, the state is not going to say no.
And is the Gaming Commission required to follow any recommendations from the state's gaming facilities location board, or do they have some wiggle room with what they decide to do?
The language in the law, I think, is a little ambiguous on that front. There was this period where the casino applicants could ask questions to the Gaming
Mm.
Commission before they submitted their applications. And I noticed a bunch of them were like, can you explain this weird thing in the text where it says the board makes recommendations, but then the commission awards the licenses? Is that just a formality? And the commission kind of didn't answer. It just said, we will follow the recommendation of the board or something. So, like, it does seem like maybe there is some kind of wiggle room that the powers that be tried to leave in there to give the commission some latitude, but I think almost certainly they will just end up following the recommendation of the board. Yeah.
So if you had to make a prediction or a bet, so to speak, what does the Gaming Facilities Location Board do?
They're a black box as far as I can tell. They're not, telegraphing to the outside world, but just from talking to insiders in the process, based on, what they think the rational fiscal move would be, I would bet that they will award all three licenses to the three remaining competitors and not try to complicate things beyond that.
Well, Nick, thank you so much for making the time, and I hope for your sake there is more drama here and it doesn't play out in any sort of boring or predictable fashion moving forward.
Let's hope not. Yeah, thanks so much, David.
For more than 100 years, the New York State Association of Counties has served as the united voice of New York's county leaders, fostering excellence in county government and advocating for sustainable funding and sensible legislation that protects local taxpayers and the essential services they rely on. Learn more at nysac.org. And we're back with Working Rules, and we're joined by Alex Elmasri, Vice President of Operations and Growth for the Parkside Group, who's here to talk about this fall's elections, including maybe making some predictions. But first, we've got the development of a lawsuit challenging the boundaries of the 11th Congressional District in New York, which covers Staten Island and part of Brooklyn. This feels like a Hail Mary attempt by Democrats to get the state's lines drawn again for 2026 instead of waiting for 2028. So my position is I'll start caring about this lawsuit once and if it reaches the state's top court. How are you thinking about this, Alex?
It's definitely a Hail Mary, there's no question, but folks thought the other previous lawsuits were also Hail Marys, and they ended up overturning the lines, right? And that's kind of how we have the lines that we ended up with. I think given everything we've experienced with redistricting, that you can never say it's out of the question that it will happen. And the last thing you want to do is being taken off guard when this stuff happens and wake up one day to a push alert on your phone that they're redrawing the maps again. So I would say, yes, it's a Hail Mary, but I think there's a legitimate chance something could come of this at the end of the day.
Well, I think the courts have been viewed as really the only mechanism for redistricting in New York to be advanced by Democrats prior to 2028, which is the earliest it could happen with a traditional constitutional amendment. But you're a smart guy who's always looking for angles. Is there anything else that we should be thinking about? Are there any other cards that Democrats have potentially up their sleeve, whether it's challenging the Senate lines that haven't been redrawn or some other sort of court challenge that could happen between now and next fall?
No, I don't. I think this is, kind of it. While I don't think it will happen, but something to keep in mind is when these things get to the courts, we did see this the last time the lines were overturned because the court decided to also overturn the Senate lines, which was very unexpected, is that when it gets into the hands of courts, you kind of never know what's going to happen. So while this is only talking about Staten Island, who knows? The court might be like, redo all the lines, right? Or something like that. So I just think that, again, Hail Mary, I don't think this will happen, but you just never know. And like, you never know what the ruling is going to be or how far it will go, or if it's just going to be contained to Staten Island and Brooklyn. To be honest, it will affect Manhattan too.
Yeah.
Part of their lawsuit is that the district should be redrawn into Lower Manhattan. So if it does go through, it'll actually affect three boroughs. But the question is, does it actually have a cascading effect? And the court rules that we need to redraw all the lines.
Well, as we talk on October 29th, we have some elections underway, including early voting in New York City, where turnout has far exceeded what happened 4 years ago. I'm loath to read too much into early voting, but I do think you can make some meaningful inferences if there are some wide variations or anything that really stands out, like if you're seeing maybe new voters turning out. So what, if any, tea leaves are you reading into the turnout so far?
There is nothing more politicos like to do than reading the tea leaves of early voting and talking about it
We'll take any data we can get.
over and over and over again. and then everyone claiming they were right after election day, no matter what they said. Early voting is up. Everyone online in the Twitterverse is freaking out that a lot of people are voting. I would actually say that, people don't care about like Orange County early voting data, but like because I am a real political nerd, if you look at like Orange County, Dutchess County, early voting is up across the state right now, actually more than it's ever been before, which I find really interesting. There's a lot of people motivated. Obviously, look, Zoran Cuomo are top of mind for people, but I think there's something larger happening here. I think people are motivated more than they ever were by Trump and are using the ballot box to go and vote early. And I think we actually see a lot of Democrats winning outside New York City.
You don't think Orange County Executive Steve Newhouse is in trouble, though, do you?
I would be, just as I would be surprised if the courts overturned the election, I would be surprised if Steve Newhouse lost, but never say never.
But it doesn't matter, right? If someone votes early, they don't count for more than one vote. So what is the significance of Democrats being excited to send a message to Republicans if more Democrats don't turn out?
Right. I mean, to your point, what we look for when we look at this data is, are any of these people folks who only vote in presidential years
Right.
and were motivated then, but then don't come out? Seeing some new voters, obviously, there's just not enough data to tell us if it's enough to swing the election. And then also, you don't know what's going to happen on election day. Sometimes you look at this and feel really good, and you're like, wow, Democrats, 20% of the people are, presidential year voters to come out, but then you get swamped on election day with Republicans. So I always tell people, stay focused. You can't make too much hay out of it. Some of the things we're seeing is that there are some presidential year voters coming out and voting in this off year.
Do you have a sense of the makeup of those voters? Because it's one thing to be, say, a young person who's voting who doesn't typically vote in off-year elections. It's another thing to be older or maybe more conservative, or the hallmarks of maybe a more conservative voter. Because, say, sticking with New York City, one is good for Zoran Mamdani and one is good for Andrew Cuomo. Is that picture becoming clear at this point? Like, who are these new voters?
There's definitely what I'm calling the boomer surge in New York City. There's definitely kind of that age range is coming out. I think it's reading too much into it to call those people either Cuomo or Zoran voters. If you're Cuomo, you need a huge amount of those people to vote for you to potentially win, right? So I think it's kind of saying too much. Oh, they're coming out at such a higher rate than they did in the primary, because it's making a huge assumption that all of those people are going to be Cuomo voters and enough to overtake Zoran in a three-way race where you still have Curtis Sliwa banking many Republican votes. I would push back on that. This is like, some saving grace for Andrew Cuomo.
Well, as an online observer of this New York City mayoral election, it feels, and going with your gut is never a good way to think about elections, but it feels like Zoran Mamdani is limping to the finish line. And while I would still want to be him as opposed to Andrew Cuomo, what do you think of the idea that the Mamdani campaign might die by 1,000 cuts delivered by moderate Democrats and Republicans? Like, I think about what's happening today with Congressman Tom Suozzi endorsing Andrew Cuomo. I don't know whether that brings out more Long Island voters to participate in the old New York City mayoral election, but what do you think about that idea that Mamdani is going to be dragging across the finish line here?
I don't know why you're saying limping. I feel like, campaign's in a similar spot it was like a month ago.
Sure. It could be. Again, I gave you the caveat. This is my online observations, which could be worth nothing.
That is true. Look, I think Suozzi endorsing Cuomo is more about Suozzi politics than having any effect on the mayoral race.
In case you forget, people, I am not a socialist for 2026.
Right, exactly. And look, he's played his politics always fairly well, right? That's how he...
Except for a run for governor.
Whoops, forgot about that one.
Yeah.
But he played his let me restate that. He's played his Long Island politics fairly well. And he understands it, and he gets his district very well and what's needed there, especially in a time when Long Island is voting for more Republicans. Look, again, I just think at the end of the day, you have to look at the big picture and the overall numbers. Yes, Cuomo's probably going to end up doing a little better than people thought, but you have to make up a lot of votes first of all, he's not even on the Democratic line.
You got
Then
to
you have
search him out.
yeah, you have to go find him, and then you have to. Eric Adams dropped out. Eric Adams is still on the ballot, so that's number two. I over under. Does Eric Adams get more or less than 5%? Probably under, but he's still probably going to poll in 3-4%.
Wow.
And I just don't know then where the votes are for Cuomo to get more than Zoran.
Well, let's stick with Long Island, where Nassau County Executive Bruce Blakeman's reelection bid appears to be in cruise control. Does that outcome matter in terms of his future plans, like a run for governor? For example, if he runs up the score against some nameless Democrat, does he have a stronger argument to make internally about being the right Republican to take on Governor Hochul?
It's a good question. Look, I think that when you meet expectations, it doesn't matter if you get 52% or 57%. So I don't think it makes too much of a difference at the end of the day. I think what is interesting is if he were to primary Stefanik,
which I don't think will happen.
I don't think will happen either. A lot of votes do come out of Nassau County, right? So if he's able to pull in a lot of votes from Nassau County, it does give you a pretty big platform to go out there and say, I'm walking in with X amount of votes in a Republican primary. I don't know where Stefanik is getting her votes from in that primary, right? I think Long Island is a pretty good bastion of votes for a Republican. Now, I don't think it makes a that large of a difference, right? If he's going to get 52 or 55 or 56% against Seth Kozlow, who's the Democratic.
Did you have to look that up?
No.
Wow, very impressive. That's why you're our go-to political commentator. Sticking with the governor's race, though, we have a neighboring race in New Jersey right now, and I wonder whether you view that and its results as a potential harbinger of what's coming in New York. Because in 2021, Phil Murphy wins by 3 points. A year later, Governor Hochul has a very tight election for New York, at least. What, if anything, are you reading into these results for New Jersey?
I think the Democrat will win. I think, you talked about the margin in Nassau County. I think the margin will matter there for Stefanik. She keeps saying she's going to announce after Election Day, let's say she does, and she runs. Let's say the Democrat only wins by 1 point, right? I think it gives her a platform for fundraising and narrative that, this was kind of a sleepy governor's race. Now I'm going to take this momentum and we're going to win back New York, right? That will be her narrative, and it's a pretty good narrative for her to have. The Democrats in Jersey are outspending by millions of dollars the Republican. The one thing Stefanik has is a lot of money, and I'm sure there will be more outside money in New York on her behalf than there was in the Jersey race. So it'll be a pretty good narrative for her to have. Does it reflect what will happen in New York next year? I think it's, that's very, very hard to say.
Well, finally, I want to talk about the what I believe is the only state race that's going to be on the ballot this fall, and that's a special election in the 115th Assembly District to replace Assemblymember D. Billy Jones. It's Republican Brent Davison and Democrat Michael Cashman. And this is a district that has seen Billy Jones run without opposition some years, despite the fact that there's pretty much an even split between Democrats and Republicans, and his predecessor was a Republican, with the caveat that I have no inside knowledge and don't have any sense of what the campaigns have been like. This feels like a toss-up to me, but what's your sense of this race?
It's actually the only assembly district where a Democrat is the incumbent. Now, obviously, it's an open seat where there are more Republicans than there are Democrats in the whole state.
What about Kerry Warner's district?
I don't think Republicans outnumber Democrats there.
According to the Board of Elections website information I'm looking at right now, as of February of 2025, there were 36,000 Republicans and 33,000 Democrats, whereas in the 115th, there are 31,000 Democrats and 29,800 Republicans.
I was told this yesterday by someone who I will not name.
Throw them under the bus. Let's hear it. Who was it?
No.
Come on. No. Who's giving you bad intel? The only reason I know that stat is because Kerry Warner is my representative.
I think that this race is actually really interesting, especially because it's on the border with Canada, and a lot of Trump's attacks have been on Canada, and there's endless articles about, Canadian tourism being down and how that's affected Western and the North Country here in New York. And how voters, this is something where like Trump's policies are directly affecting a lot of voters in a district, right? And I think it'll be really, really interesting to see if they go and protest his actions at the ballot box. And I think that's a really good tea leaf for, congressional races and state leg races here in New York next year. Because those are economic things that people are really feeling in a bad way. And, if the Democrat wins, I think it's a bad sign for Republicans next year. It's, that's a real protest vote against where the Republican Party is.
Well, are you ready to predict that Democrats will hang on to this seat?
I will predict that Democrats will hang on to the seat, especially with this new information that there's more Democrats than Republicans. I think it'll be like 1 to 3 points. I think it's going to be very close.
Well, we're all about accountability here on Dispatches from Planet Albany, so in a future episode, we will let the listeners know how you did on your random pontifications today. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today's predictions. We've been speaking with Alex Elmasri. He is a Vice President of Operations and Growth for the Parkside Group. Alex, thanks so much for making the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Because of the Iron Curtain that Cranes New York has, if there's something that you're working on that you want to talk about that we're just not seeing, feel free to reach out. There's a chance I might say get lost, Nick. I don't care, but I might be also like, oh, that's a really good one. I'm glad you flagged that. And if it is the former, I'll probably say it in more diplomatic terms.